This Rolex Datejust was sent in by a viewer, and while it looks like it's in rough shape, trust me when I say the worst is yet to come. Now, Octavio had already warned me about the water damage, but the extent of it was still unknown. Sounds like a can of spray paint. Well, let's get on with it. Oh no, what happened? This watch holds a lot of sentimental value for Octavio. It was gifted to him by a World War II bomber pilot who employed his father for over 30 years. Aside from the rust, the rotor axle is worn and the balance is broken. The missing crown and case tube seals are the most obvious causes for the water ingestion. The next step is to get the movement out of the case to see how extensive the damage is. My goal is to repair what I can, replace what I must, and see if I can approach this project practically, balancing cost and performance, and I'll explain my reasoning along the way. The stem is going to be a challenge to remove. I'll revisit that later. For now, I'll focus on removing the automatic bridge and see if I'll have a better access to the winding pinion from there. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting that. My expectations continue to drop the deeper I get into this watch. This Presto puller is helpful when removing the 5-spoke sweep second drive wheel. Without a stem, I'm going to try to let down the main spring by controlling the ratchet wheel using its screw while holding back the click. That's not budging. Not even a little. I really hope there isn't any power in that barrel. But one can dream. I was very fortunate these screws along the crown wheel came out relatively easily, considering the rust. The 3 parts that make up the crown wheel are all rusted together. It's springtime at night in South Carolina. You know what that means? Lots of frogs singing. Now I can carefully remove the ratchet wheel, click, and click spring, the latter of which took some convincing to remove but appeared relatively unharmed by the rust. Everything's stuck. The stem protrudes through the winding pinion and sliding clutch seen here. Some strategically placed drops of penetrating oil should help loosen things up.
The next morning.
The oil seemed to do its job. I'm going to go ahead and just remove the setting lever screw. Hopefully I can just yank out the carcass of this stem. Again, wishful thinking. On to plan C. Disassemble even more of the movement with the hopes of poking out the stem from the other side. I had to pry up the second-hand pinion, which means I had to be mindful that the second hand is just floating around on the dial side now. Removing the train wheel bridge reveals a troubling amount of corrosion to the center wheel, while the upper ends of the other wheels seem serviceable. This looks like some sort of biological disaster.
In today's game of operation, I'm trying to press on the tip of the stem through a tiny access hole.
I think I saw it move.
Until I think of other ideas, I can at least remove the balance and anything else I can while the movement's still in the case. That pivot is toasted. I can gently slide out the escape wheel, fourth wheel, and third wheel, then uninstall the pallet fork. The center wheel is still secured by the cannon pinion on the other side.
No, I don't. That might be too far gone.
This is the hacking lever, which stops the watch when in time setting mode by lightly resting on the edge of the balance.
So I'm really at a loss here. This pinion spins just fine now. The sliding clutch is free. The stem has a little bit of wiggle room on it, but it won't come out. So my only guess is the setting lever on the other side is fused, stuck to the plate of the movement, still latched onto the detent of the stem. I've removed everything I could, and as you can see, for those wondering, why don't you just take the movement out of the case? Well, you can't, because for Rolex, these case screws are under the lip, and to actually get the movement out, you need to rotate it all the way around so that one of these case screws ends up into this spot here where it won't grab onto anything anymore. Then the other case screw ends up here. But with the stem still stuck in there, it won't rotate. And I've removed the case tube with the hopes of being able to latch onto something, and I actually was able to get some needle nose pliers on it. I really pulled as hard as I could, and it just doesn't want to budge. Thomas suggested was to put the setting lever screw back in, tighten it up, then loosen it up a little bit, and then just push on it. And hopefully that'll break loose the setting lever from the plate. So I'm going to go ahead and try that. Out a little bit and see. So now that it's partially threaded on, I can give it a little push. I felt it go down. Will the stem come out now? Oh, come on, come on. Oh my goodness. Look at that. Thank you, Thomas.
Finally, I can remove the movement and begin disassembling the dial side. I can already see extensive water damage to the lacquer layers of the dial and to the hands especially. These hands can be partially restored, but the pitting is likely very deep. Since the hands are a key visible feature of a watch, replacing them would be worth the expense. As you can see, the various layers of the dial finish were damaged by the water and have begun flaking away. After consulting with the owner, we will be replacing this dial with one in better condition, but we'll save the original to be stored with the watch for sentimental reasons. Might as well add a new date display disc to the list. The date jumper is relatively unscathed, as are many of the other components to the calendar work. The date drive wheel and its associated cam and spring are also removed and inspected for any damage. There's a tiny jewel on the underside of that yoke that interacts with the drive wheel. The hour wheel should slide right off, but it's held up by the rust that's formed around the cannon pinion over that center wheel. That all kind of looks like sludge.
I'm really surprised how well the keyless looks, considering this is where the water entered the watch. Sure, the cannon pinion, the clutch were a bit bound up, but the setting lever, spring, the yoke spring, setting gear, setting lever, they all look fine.
The automatic work, on the other hand, is another story. I'll get to see the extent of the damage once the plate is removed. Remember how the ratchet wheel and barrel were completely jammed up, yet I was still able to turn the automatic rotor? Well, something had to give, and it was the poor pinion of the output drive wheel. The reversers may not look bad on the surface, but they're pretty much ruined. Unfortunately, there's no restoring these. The rotor pinion has fused with the axle of the rotor. Again, Croyle penetrating oil helps free it up.
Many tic-tacs later.
If it weren't for the fact that some of the material was lost due to the extent of the rust, this could have been salvageable. Same goes for the axle clip.
Ooh, that's hardly recognizable.
Unfortunately, there's no saving this part either. On the bright side, there's a way to replace just the axle and avoid needing to purchase an entirely new rotor. The old axle is simply punched out of the rotor. The jewels look fine, and aside from the plating being worn away by friction, the bridge should clean up nicely. What am I thinking? Safety first. Yikes. What am I thinking? All kidding aside, a better option would have been to do that within a plastic bag.
Toast. There's no salvaging this.
I'm now using naphtha and a nylon brush to break loose as much of the rust as possible. Fortunately, the plates themselves are not made of steel, so they should clean up pretty well, with the exception of areas where the plating itself is worn due to the components like the automatic work continuing to move for some time after the rust had begun to form. As usual, every jewel is scrubbed using pegwood as part of the pre-cleaning process.
My expectations are pretty low, but I'm going to try soaking some of these parts in evaporest just to see if any of them can be saved.
The cap jewels need to be separated from their hole jewels for cleaning.
Oh man.
It's like a murder scene in here. Okay, that staff is rusted and broken. Maybe it broke before the watch went for a swim, or could have broken because of the deep corrosion caused by the rust. That's rather academic at this point. In any case, let's get on with it. I just realized, it's been a bit since I featured a staff replacement in a video. Fear not, my Rex Roller Remover Angry Beaver Teeth tool has been getting a lot of use off camera these days. It's only one way to remove a roller table from the underside of a balance staff. There are of course many ways to skin that cat. For example, this tool can more conveniently pry the table off the staff, but in this situation I'd be concerned about deforming the table considering the level of rust that's formed along the staff. I'd rather just iteratively and gently tap it free. You're probably wondering, what's the lathe for? Well, the last time you saw me remove a staff, I used a tool to secure the arms of the balance while the staff is punched out. Honestly, this has worked fine for all the ones I removed, but in theory, smashing the riveted part of the staff through the hole of the balance has the potential to deform or enlarge the hole, meaning with each staff job, the balance becomes less and less perfect. A preferred alternative is to literally cut the hub of the staff from the bottom so the wheel can be gently slid off. When the wheel is freed from the staff, all that should remain of the hub is this tiny little steel ring. The new staff has arrived, and now I can prepare to rivet it to the balance wheel using the staking set. A series of taps from the dome-faced punch of the correct size expands the rivet of the staff, securing it to the wheel. The same size flat-faced punch then flattens the rivet. Here I'm just ensuring the staff is secure before proceeding with installing the safety roller table. The orientation of the table is crucial since the balance was poised from the factory with it facing a certain way. Since this balance had some marks on it, I'm able to remember which direction the impulse jewel was facing relative to those marks. The table simply friction fits onto the lower end of the staff. I'm pretty sure I faced the table the right way, but it never hurts to double check the poise. The balance is considered in poise if it coasts gently to a stop without wide swings back and forth at the end, which would indicate a heavy spot. The hairspring has a touch of corrosion on it. I'm not sure how it will affect this movement's performance, but the only way to source a new one is by purchasing a quote balance complete, which alone would add hundreds of dollars to the job. I'm being sensitive to Octavio's budget, and we can reevaluate if the watch's performance isn't acceptable. And look, if money was no object here, you wouldn't even be watching this video because it would make more sense just to spend a few $1,000s to swap the movement. Considering the corrosion isn't extensive, this may not be worth blowing the budget for, but I'll see how close to chronometer accuracy I can get. These screws work fine, but they look terrible. Remember in my last video how I polished each one using the staking set? Well, that process is too much of a pain to execute at scale. So I guess now is a good time as any to make that frog polishing tool I've been meaning to build. I derived the plans from one of Alex's videos. I encourage you to check out his channel for a deeper dive into this tool and how you could go about making your own. I was especially excited to use my little hobby mill for this part of the project as I just started learning the basics of milling. After cutting a piece off the rough bar stock, I'm spending some time machining all the edges to ensure they're square. Next, I'm turning the brass rods that will serve as the threaded carriers for the height adjusters. The brass carriers themselves will be threaded to M5 and will support an M3 adjuster. The holes for the clamp will also be threaded to M3. A few slots are milled into the surface to support varying sized screws. I cheated a bit and just bought these knurled thumb nuts from Amazon. I'm no click spring, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I polished the bottom of the height adjusters so they just glide a little easier along the surface. On to the first victim. Hey, that looks nice. Just need a little cleaning within the slot though. This was a fun little project, though it took several attempts as evidenced by the reject pile. I read it's customary for watchmakers to sign their name on custom-built tools, so a bit of laser engraving finished the job. Oh, and these are the blued screws that secure the automatic bridge to the movement. They will need to be re-blued after being refinished. You've seen me flame blue parts with a torch, but I recently purchased this old laboratory hot plate to make the process a little easier and more repeatable. The pinion leaves are each polished using a sharp tip of pegwood and cerium oxide paste. The surfaces of the pivots are then burnished on the jacket lathe, which is a process that work hardens the surface by compressing the steel and smoothing over any imperfections. The overall sizes of the pivots are generally unaffected by the process, perhaps they're reduced by a few thousandths of a millimeter. If it were much more than that, then the side shake within the jewel bearing would become excessive, and at that point I could make the decision to then replace the part. I could just replace all the parts, but that wouldn't be very economical for Octavio. There is an opportunity to preserve and restore the train of wheels. With the exception of the second wheel, the rest of the train could be burnished and polished and will hopefully avoid needing to purchase replacement parts. Sure, it's easier just to swap the part, but where's the fun in that? In all seriousness though, Rolex won't sell replacement parts to just anybody. I'm not an authorized repair shop, and purchasing genuine replacement parts on the gray market can be quite expensive. At this point, I have a clear understanding of what I can restore or repair, and what needs to be replaced. It's time to do a little shopping.
What have you done to me? Damn mess, I'll tell you that.
What's all this?
You tell me, stick, they're all addressed to you.
The majority of the parts are genuine, and sure, generic versions are available in some cases, but I think it's worth it to spend a little extra more on the parts that are more critical to the functioning of the movement, or have tolerances that can't really be compromised in order for them to fit. Components like the mainspring, however, can be generically sourced, usually without any issues. 4 equally spaced dabs of braking grease are placed on the wall of the mainspring barrel. The new mainspring comes from the factory in this convenient holder, so it just needs to be pressed in. The new barrel arbor is compared to what remains of the original before it's installed. There are some battle scars left over on many of the surfaces of this movement that won't affect the function of the watch. Epilam is used to treat several components, including the pallet jewels, which is a way to prevent oil migration, among other things. The solution is quite volatile, so the parts are dried by giving them a spin over the heater. Prior to assembly, I'm just inspecting the jewels for any visible contamination or grime that didn't come off in the wash. I'm using Mobius HP 1300 for the higher friction areas like the keyless work.
So that's the setting lever screw. This is always a fun one to try to film because I have to flip it over and put on the setting lever and then kind of screw them together. So right there is the setting lever screw, and then this is the setting lever. So now I'll screw the two of them together. Now onto this shock spring. It's not the first time I've had to replace one of these, but I think it's the first time I've had to do it on camera. Key to doing this is to do it with the jewels in place. You can lean the shock spring on the jewel, slide it across, and snap it into place. I highly recommend when you replace one of these, you buy 12. Alright, so I kind of have it lined up. And really all you gotta do is just kind of push it. The hinge should just snap right into the brass chaton. Sorry but not sorry, I'm going to do this with my finger covering it, so if it does fly off, I have some chance of containing it. So here we go. And there we have it. There's a thunderstorm going on right now, if you can hear it.
The automatic oiler leaves a perfectly sized drop of Mobius 9010 on the end stone. The balance is reattached by fitting the hairspring stud onto the movable beat adjustment arm. For any service, especially any time a balance staff is replaced, it's always good practice to first check the balance and the movement all on its own before going any further. Sometimes the staff can be sized slightly differently and need modifications. This is the best time to check for those kinds of issues. A slight puff of air should demonstrate good freedom of movement. HP 1300 is used in the barrel arbor hole and in the hole for the center wheel arbor. The only other part under the barrel bridge is this hacking lever. It's good practice to check the bushing for any kind of wear. Sometimes it needs to be broached and then tightened up. The train of wheels are lowered into position, starting with the escape wheel and working my way backwards to the second wheel. The train bridge drops nicely into place. The upper and lower bearings of the escape wheel are capped, so I'm just now oiling those with Mobius 9010 before they're reinstalled.
These super slippery jewels can ping to oblivion quite easily, so a delicate grip on the tweezers is required here.
Now checking for quick and uninhibited movement of the train. The remainder of the pivots are oiled under the microscope. The click spring and click are reinstalled. And now the ratchet wheel. I was able to reuse the crown wheel seat, but the core and the main crown wheel gear itself are new parts, as well as the screws. The sweep seconds drive wheel is mounted on the third wheel arbor. The sweep seconds pinion is then inserted through the center wheel. Whether on this channel or others, the camera is viewing the movement at a different angle than me. This is why it's sometimes obvious to an observer when there's a piece of dust or hair that's not noticed by the repairman. Fortunately, in this case, I'm editing as I go, so this little hair did not escape me this time. The pallet fork is reinstalled, and I won't oil the end stones yet. That will happen after the watch has run for at least 15 minutes, which is enough time for the epilogue to wear off the faces. Mobius 9504 is a grease that's used on the higher friction metal on metal sliding surfaces, such as where the winding pinion meets the sliding clutch. The replacement crown and stem are temporarily fitted together. The stem itself should also be greased, but I'll get to that later. So now I have this ginormous stem for now. Once I'm ready to put the movement into the case, I'll be able to trim it to size. I'll now install the rest of the keyless work, starting with the yoke.
That is the setting gear, and this is the minute wheel. And finally, the setting lever spring that serves as a jumper between the winding mode and the setting mode.
The date drive cam jewel is another slippery one that can get away from you if you're not careful. I don't plan on donating any parts to the Rolex space program today. The small plate with the date jumper arm fits over the drive wheel yoke. And now to fit this heavy spring. Next, the hour wheel is fitted over the cannon pinion before the date drive wheel is lowered onto its post. I have to push the yoke away a bit so the cam on the underside of the wheel clears the jewel. Once again, this is a reverse threaded screw, which you can tell by the 3 slots. This ring is the seat for the date display, which is very lightly greased with 9504. With a bit of wind to the main spring, it's now good to verify each tooth of the escape wheel interacts nicely with the pallet fork. Moment of truth, folks. I've got goosebumps. Now that's a great feeling, considering the condition this movement started in. Not done yet, though. It's been at least 15 minutes, so I removed the balance in the fork so I could grease the tips of the pallet jewels. I could have done this through the little holes in the movement, but I feel like I have more control this way. Accountability time. It's been about 12 hours or so. Accuracy is pretty good at single digits of seconds per day. Amplitude's alright, though I would have liked to see it a little higher. It'll need to run in for at least a day to let the oil settle in, then I'll make some adjustments using the Microstella tool, and hopefully by then the amplitude will have improved a bit. The date change is triggered so that I can set the hands at 12. The sweep second pinion is only held down by a brass friction spring, so I'm supporting it from the other side while the hand is pressed on. Hacking mode stops timekeeping when setting the time and resumes timekeeping when the crown is pushed back in. I've got to do something about this case. I finally bought a proper bezel removal tool, which I ordered from WWII. Still family owned after all these years. Those guys have been nothing but helpful, and the shipping was super fast from California to South Carolina. Their website may look dated, but it's really just no frills and honestly an excellent resource aside from being a lifeline for a hobbyist like myself. I would prefer to keep the original crystal, and this one isn't as bad as it looks. That'll buff out. Well, that's no good anymore. Well loved, well worn, I'm just going to give the case a light polish. I don't want to go overboard here, so restraint is key. There are some deeper gouges that will remain, which is okay. I certainly don't want to over-polish the case. The general approach here is to polish what needs polishing and protect what doesn't with heat tape. I also use a scouring pad to lightly freshen up the satin surfaces. Case restoration is an art form in itself and comes with its own set of specialized tools and skills. So what I'm able to achieve with my basic setup is really just scratching the surface of what's actually possible. Nothing a little elbow grease couldn't fix. Polywatch works great on acrylic crystals. I encourage you to give it a try, but keep in mind it won't do anything for scratches in mineral glass or especially sapphire crystals. The stem is used to help align the Cyclop lens at the 3 o'clock position. The bezel fits nice and tight over the edge of the crystal, which is sitting around a lip of the case. Again, this was a conservative polish and freshening up of the case back, and crystal. The deeper battle scars sustained over the course of this watch's history will still remain. The old case tube was pretty much worn, and as we saw before, it would have needed new gaskets anyway, so this new one will be reinstalled in its place. The caseback has a new gasket as well, and it's lightly coated with silicone for a smooth and even seal. I temporarily placed the movement in the case so I could figure out how much of the stem needs to be snipped off. Now I can clean up the end and screw the crown back on with a bit of Loctite. Finally, I lightly coat the stem with some 9504 grease before reinserting it into the movement. The case screws are tightened after the stem is inserted to ensure the movement is already rotated at the perfect angle inside the case. The new rotor axle can be riveted in place using a special stake designed for the 1530 family of movements. The parts of the automatic work have the most cosmetic wear because it continued to move around despite all the rust. All the debris has ground away the plating in various spots on the bridges and rotor. Although it looks dirty, the appearance is actually due to discoloration and pitting from the damage. The new rotor axle clip and pinion are fitted. as well as the new reversers.
That one's a different color. This is one of the originals. Color me crazy, but I've been duped. Well, this really grinds my gears. I'm gonna need to reverser that purchase. Time for me to wind down and...
Several bad puns later.
Okay, let's try this again. This is the new transmission wheel. I could have restaked the arbor back onto the existing one, but the rust damage was far too extensive to bother. Each of the pivots receives a small amount of oil after the retaining plate is installed. The automatic work can be reinstalled, and there are several checks I'm going to need to do after it's fitted. The rotor is carefully rotated both directions, checking for smoothness. With healthy reversers, I should be able to manually wind the movement using the crown without causing the rotor to move much at all. Finally, the rotor should swing freely in both directions, under gravity, while driving the output gear. This watch started out as a borderline lost cause, but has undergone a remarkable transformation into a reliable timekeeper once again. I can now proceed to make the final timekeeping adjustments after having run the watch for several days. Since the Rolex 1570 uses a free-sprung balance, there is no regulator on the balance cock to adjust the rate. Instead, adjustments are achieved using this tool to turn in or out the pair of Microstella screws directly on the balance wheel. While this looks dangerous, Rolex intentionally made it so that adjustments could be done while the movement is cased. Fortunately, the amplitude has improved by almost 20 degrees since the first day, now that the oils have had a chance to settle in. I hope Octavio enjoys this watch for many years and that you've all learned something from this video today, but if not, I hope you still found it enjoyable. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you feel I've earned it, and leave a comment letting me know what was your favorite part of this video. Thanks for fixing watches with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.